terms of types of properties for investment, so when you're speaking to investors, what are you advising them to look at? I mean, bear in mind we're talking about overseas investors, so there's going to be a specific type of property that they can or can't access anyway, and potentially you can probably touch on that as well. But in terms of the types of properties that people are looking at, what are they focusing on?
Yeah, look, it's very straightforward. If you're dealing with expats who have or buyers have Australian residency, they can buy whatever they want in Australia. The sector of the market that I'm dealing with at international properties within Jones Lang is Australian property, and we're dealing with expats and foreign buyers. But what we found is that through government regulation, most of the focus is on brand new apartments or brand new properties because overseas buyers are restricted from buying in the second-hand market. So it's very important that if you are listening to this webinar and you're thinking about investing to the Australian property market, if you don't have an Australian passport, you are restricted to buying a property that has never been transacted. So that tends to mean a house and land, a townhouse, or an apartment. It's as simple as that. And in fact, the Australian government has been very aggressive in terms of making sure that people understand that is what the regulation has been for many years. But they've gone further than that and issued a publication 2 or 3 months ago, and it was in the headlines everywhere. And that's just basically restating that there is a blanket ban on foreigners buying established dwellings until mid 2027.
So even if I saw that, so even if you've got a temporary visa to enter and live in Australia, you still can't purchase on the secondary market. It would have to be through the new build or house and land packages, correct?
Yeah, probably what I would say at this point is that whenever we're dealing with buyers from overseas, we always do two things straight up, and one is we make sure that they have access to a very good accountant, and also they get good legal advice. We will never sell the property unless a buyer appoints a solicitor. But on the accounting front, because the tax can be pretty complex, and it's different from on it, for all individuals are different. It's the most important thing is that they talk to a good accountant, and we've got some very good ones in both Hong Kong and Singapore who can help the buyers through that process. The simple answer is no, buyers cannot, but there is some grey areas, Ludo. But I think just for the purposes of this webinar, it's just important that buyers they either fall into two categories, even if they're on a short-term visa, and that is even buyers on a short-term visa, they don't have Australian residency, they should be only focusing on brand new properties.
Got it. Okay. So we've discussed in terms of type of properties investors can buy. When we're looking at yields and potential returns on those, what are the different areas saying? What would someone expect to get out of a property investment in Australia?
Yeah, okay. So again, we're just focusing on residential properties. Look, my experience for, personally and from dealing with the buyers is the first thing is if you are buying a property, again, we were talking about all the different cities operate at different rates. Obviously, within each major capital city, if I specifically talk about Sydney, if you're buying, most of the buying activity from foreign buyers tends to be within 5 to 10 kilometres of this CBD. And from Chatswood, a lot of buyers buy into the North Shore or the eastern suburbs. So if we're talking about capital gains in those locations over the last 10 years, if you bought a property in 2015, you probably doubled your money in most locations in Sydney. In terms of your yields, the vacancy rates are very low in those locations. There's people lining up. If you have a property, an apartment or a house which becomes available, tends to be a queue or multiple applicants who want to rent that property from you. There's very good access to rental agents who can assist. But the yields aren't great. I mean, because capital values, people really tend to buy because of the capital growth, but the rental market is very strong, and probably if you get somewhere between 3 to 4% for most properties in Sydney, if you're buying brand new, you're probably doing pretty well. But I can tell you firsthand, if you're buying off the plan and say properties maybe finished in 3 years, I personally have bought properties, for example, one in Brisbane, 5 years ago, where the price has gone up by 30, 40%, and where the yield is sitting at 7 or 8%. So the only reason I bring that up is just that it really depends on where you're buying the property. I think the key always is not to buy in areas where there's really high new supply coming into the market. So when you are looking at buying, regardless of where you are buying the property is, the more supply that is coming into that location, the less capital growth, but you might still find that the yields are stronger in those areas where the capital growth isn't as strong. Like Melbourne, there's a lot of discussion about the Melbourne CBD, where there's still very strong foreign buying demand, but where the capital gains haven't been great, but where buyers in Singapore, Malaysia, and Hong Kong are turning around and saying, well, they're getting yields which, if they bought 2, 3 years ago, could be anywhere between 6 to 10% on a long-term basis. There also is Airbnb. So I'll just bring up Airbnb, where buyers can purchase an off-plan property, and if the specific project they're buying in allows short-term rents. I mean, we've got a couple of properties in Melbourne at the moment where easily, with on completion, buyers are able to get 9 to 12% yield on their property. So I've covered a bit of territory there.
Mm,
The key is, when you're buying your property, have a really fixed idea whether you're looking for capital growth or you're looking for yield, because we definitely have buyers who are coming to us saying capital growth isn't really that important. We just want yield. And definitely there is a different type of property we would steer someone towards versus if they just said we're just interested in capital gain.
got it. Okay, so keen to rattle on these questions. In terms of taxes and government incentives, I know there is a different stamp duty for locals to overseas and different locations as well, but just your quick overview in terms of the breakdown of that and what that looks like.
Yeah, very simply, across Australia, foreign buyers will pay whatever the local stamp duty element is. Let's just call it somewhere around 5%. So every single buyer in Australia, including Australian nationals and foreign buyers, all have to pay a local stamp duty. Let's call it 5%. Then foreign buyers have to pay an extra 8 to 9%. It varies slightly state by state, but it sits at 8 to 9%. So generally speaking, you're about 14% stamp duty for foreign buyers. However, there is two states in Australia where there is government concessions. That's Victoria and in Western Australia. So if you buy a property in Perth at the moment, you can get, sorry, up to June next year, there is concessions where you could make savings of up to $50,000 only if you're buying off the plan. And in Victoria, the same as well, because in both Western Australia and Victoria, the governments are trying to stimulate supply because, as we said, population growth is very strong. So until October next year in Western Australia, if you're buying specifically off the plan, there are some major concessions where you could save up to 4% of the local stamp duty. So instead of paying 5%, if you buy a property off the plan before a brick is laid, you might only pay 1% of that 5%, and then you still have your overseas stamp duty. So you might get in at 9% versus 13 or 14%. So pretty significant
Oh, wow. Yeah.
savings. Again, it's just if you're buying off the plan. So that's the stamp duty. There is other FIRB, Foreign Investment Review Board. That is an additional tax, which when you're first buying the property up front is a cost of, let's call it somewhere around $14,500 per $1 million that you spend. That's the only tax where there's really been any major changes in the last sort of 12 months. And maybe there's a slight change of, I think it's $300 or $400, which is just being in play at the moment. I'm not sure of aware of any other changes which are being made to taxes at the moment. So that's good news. There's only two other taxes that foreign buyers probably need to be aware of. One is absentee tax, and that is where on any property that you are renting out versus occupying, there's an annual tax of somewhere between 2 to 4%, depending on which city you have the property. And it's not on the value of the property, it's on the value of the land. So if you have an apartment where there's 200 apartments on the site, then the land value is a portion between those 200 buyers or owners, and obviously the size of the apartment that they have, and then that's how they they calculate what your portion of the land value would be. So in most instances, that absentee tax ends up being very low, but it might be a month to 2 months rental. So it's one that buyers should be aware of. And again, that changes state by state. So and then the final one is vacancy tax. If you buy a property, one of the reasons that the Australian government is allowing foreign investment into residential property in the first place is because they're trying to stimulate construction. But what they want you to do is when you complete that property, if you're not going to use it yourself, they want you to rent it out. And so there is a vacancy. It's a pretty low rate. And I'm not aware of personally anyone who is paying a vacancy rate because nearly everyone who comes to us who buys are buying for two reasons. One is for self-use, or the second is so that they can make money out of rentals. And again, the rental market is super strong. They're the key ones. And look, this isn't a tax, but it's just the system in general. The Australian government has a very good system set up, which is called negative gearing. And it just basically means for any investors, whether they're overseas or local, they have a lot of benefits in terms of tax deductions around the costs which they have when they own a property, which they can take off their income so that they can reduce their tax on an annualized basis. And again, anytime we sell an apartment, we match a buyer up with a really good accountant and they manage that on their behalf. So negative gearing is a very positive aspect about buying in Australia.
Yeah, it's like anywhere in buying any property anywhere in the world. Just make sure you got that good team around you to help you out.